Hi, and welcome to our Frankly Speaking webinar series, where we hope to provide further insights into doing business in our fast-changing world. Today's topic is simple strategic planning, structure, and implementation. We've all experienced changes to our business environment and conditions, so adapting our business plans with intent and implementing them with efficiency is vital for the sustainability, if not the survival, of our businesses going forward. My name is Anthony van der Hoek, and I'm a partner at BDO Business Services and Advisory. BDO has been providing professional services and advice to our clients for over 60 years, and we are the fastest growing professional services firm and have been so for the last 10 years. We offer audit, tax, and advisory services to a range of clients, from private individuals through to the public sector and JSE listed companies. We try hard to build lasting relationships with our clients because we understand your needs and challenges. So presenting this webinar is important to us, as we know that having a strategic plan is vital to the success of your business. At BDO Business Services and Advisory, we offer a full 360-degree range of business solutions, from outsourcing of our clients' non-core activities such as accounting, reporting, and administration, to tax and other compliance and business matters. So today our guest speaker is Greg Castle. Greg is an internationally certified professional business and executive coach with more than 26 years experience as an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate company director, with a track record of successful growth and strategic change management, employing strong market orientation across numerous industries. He is also the founder of a strategic marketing consultancy called Torkel and partner of business coaching company Action Coach. So the format of today's webinar is that Greg will share his insights, which will take approximately 45 minutes, after which there will be time to take some questions. You are most welcome to post questions on the Q&A during the webinar, which will be answered at the end. There will also be a short survey at the end, which I ask you to look out for. I now hand you over to Greg.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and thanks once again to BDO for inviting me to talk to you today as part of this 5-part series. It's a great honor to be here, and thank you to all of you that have logged on today. I think perhaps the starting point is that this topic of strategic planning is very often something that puts a huge amount of fear into people for some interesting reasons. And I've come to find over the years that the reasons more than anything have to do with how we go about doing planning, but more so the understanding of what it's all about and why it's necessary. It's really not something that's it's a corporate thing. It's really something that we should all be doing, and I'm going to spend hopefully the 45 odd minutes today just sort of taking you through a very simple process that will explain to you the best way to go about it. But I think the things that really put fear into people is, first and foremost, that people don't know where to start, which I come across very, very often, or else they know where to start, but they don't do it properly. They're not comprehensive enough in what they're actually putting into their plan, or else they overcomplicate it. One of the things that I've found most often throughout my career, both in corporate and in my own business and in coaching businesses over the last 10 or 12 years, is that people overcomplicate strategic planning. It really shouldn't be complicated. And that often leads to the fourth reason why planning doesn't often work, and that's because it's almost never implemented. There's nobody holding the business owner to account, for one, or else the business plan is just way too complicated and it ends up becoming a big fat document that gets stuck into the bottom drawer and nobody ever looks at it again until the next year when they have to do strategic planning once again. So I think really perhaps over the last 27 years of my own career, I've found that the best way forward is, one, simplicity, secondly, a logical flow to the planning process, keeping it practical, but then being held accountable at the end of the day to the implementation thereof. so that it doesn't end up in that bottom drawer, and it actually becomes something that you can live. Of course, it's never cast in stone. You know, we don't know, and just this COVID experience that we've been going through over the last few months, nobody could have planned for something like this. But the point is that one needs to continue to plan and update plans depending on what the situations are that present themselves in front of us. And the starting point is really the most critical thing, and that is that you start as business owners in particular, you start by putting your own personal goals together. And I say that's the most important thing. And the reason I say that is because if you want your to work for your business for the rest of your life, then ultimately start with your business plan first. But if you want your business to work for you, then you need to start with your own personal goals. What is it that you want to achieve out of life at the end of the day? And probably the most or the best example, if you like, of putting a plan like that together, and the simplest way to do it is something that Stephen Covey came up in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and you'll see a quote from him just now. But he said that basically you need to begin with the end in mind, and by beginning with the end in mind, think about your own funeral, and then think about what you would like 5 people representing 5 aspects of your life to say at your funeral as part of their eulogy to you. Think about a spouse or a partner if you have one. Think about one of your children if you have children. Think about a closest friend representing your friends. Think about an extended family member potentially, and possibly a work colleague or a partner. And if you actually go and take the time to write their speech down, the speech that you would like them to make at your funeral, you might be quite surprised as to the kinds of things that come up that really, really are important. And just a simple thing, for example, is that very few children will say at the end of their parents' life, standing up and giving them a eulogy, well, you know, my mom or my dad was very, very rich, and they gave us huge amounts of money and copious amounts of whatever it was that we needed in life. More often than not, it's the soft issues. And so if one thinks about what is really important in life, what is going to give you the lifestyle that you really, really want, and why is that lifestyle really important, and then get your business to work for you accordingly. So if we can move on a little bit, I think we can probably skip the next slide. But it was really Socrates who said that beware the barrenness of a busy life. And that's very often what we tend to get caught up with. Stephen Covey, again, a little bit later, if we can get to that slide, said it's incredibly easy to get caught up in an activity trap in the busyness of life, to work harder and harder at climbing the ladder of success, only to discover that it's leaning against the wrong wall. It's possible to be busy, very busy, without being very effective. And that's really, really true in most things in life. If we don't plan and we're not set off in a direction that we were meant to be set off in, we're going to end up with our ladder leaning up against the wrong wall, and we're going to have climbed to the top of it. And by the time we get there, it's too late to make any changes. So the point is to make sure you put your ladder up against the right wall to begin with. So maybe a starting point is just to define what makes a successful business. And the way we like to describe it really is within the action coach system is that a successful business is a commercial, profitable enterprise. It's got to be profitable, otherwise it's a non-profit organization. That works. It obviously works, and it's therefore sustainable and it's efficient. But the really key thing to this, and this is particularly important for business owners, is that it can work without you. So a commercial, profitable enterprise that works without you. And why do I say that's so important? And this, as part of this planning process, why is it so important? Is that there's no point in developing and creating a business that you put your blood, sweat, and tears and money into for your entire life, or a big chunk of your life, only for you to get to the end of the process of deciding that you've had enough of it, or you want to ultimately retire, or that you get knocked over by a bus, God forbid, you actually, the business is worthless. The business just folds into nothingness, and the people that are reliant on that business at the end of the day, and subsequently their dependents and so on, are left destitute with no business to continue. But why not create something that you can leave behind, even if you're not going to get the benefit of it later? But why not create a business that you can scale, or that you can get to a point where at least you can sell it, or at least you can phase out of it and allow people, whether it's the next generation or somebody else, to take over the business over time. So the important thing is that the business can eventually work without you. And that's really a critical thing to start planning towards when you start your planning process for your business in the long term. So if we move on to the next slide, it's why plan strategically? Why even bother? And there's an equation that I use very often with my clients when I'm coaching them, and it really succinctly puts into place what successful change is all about, because that's really what you're planning for, is successful change in one form or another. And the equation, if we can get to it, I know there's a little bit of a slow lag in the build in the slide transitions, but just bear with us for now. The equation for successful change is, if you open brackets, D multiplied by V plus F is greater than R. So it's D times V plus F is greater than R. And I'll explain to you what those mean whilst we're waiting for the slide to come up. So D stands for dissatisfaction. So what is it that you're not happy with in your current environment that you would like to change? And it doesn't necessarily have to be negative. It could be that you've seen opportunities that mean that you're dissatisfied with where you are now, that you see the opportunity to step up to the next level. So what are you dissatisfied with at this point in time? And that's the starting point of the plan, is firstly realizing what is the current environment and situation that I'm in now that I need to change, or I want to change, or I want to improve. Then if you multiply that by V, V is now setting yourself a vision. And that vision is, call it dreams to start with, breaking that down into a set of goals. Vision is ultimately deciding on where it is that you want to go. So it's taking that dissatisfaction, multiplying it by your vision, and then adding to that F, which is the first steps that you need to take. And the first steps are absolutely critical if you want a plan to really come to fruition. Otherwise, it just becomes a plan on a piece of paper. And very, very often, that is where plans fall short. In my experience, majority of plans fall short. And there may be reasons as to why they aren't implemented. But a lot of that implementation is just the fact that the plan may just not be practical, or it may be too complicated. So if all of those things added up are greater than the resistance against change, then you have successful change. So we can move on to the next slide. It's basically, if we look at an example of, if you take a door, a basic door as an example, that you've got closed in front of you. If you would like to walk through that door, there are certain things that you need to take down in order to allow the door to open for you to walk through. So you're standing on the one side of the door, you want to get to the other side, which is your future, which is your vision, your goals, your dreams on the other side. But there's certain barriers that are standing in the way of that door. And those are the things that you need to identify very clearly in your planning process in order to be able to open turn the key, open that door handle, and walk through to the other side. And it sounds very simple, and it should be very simple. But very often it's actually coming to terms with what it is that is standing in our way that is the most complicated and the most difficult part of the planning process, Once we've identified exactly what we need to change and what we need to improve, then the rest of it very often becomes a lot simpler. So if we can move on to the business planning process flow, I've just really put together a very simple slide to indicate what the process flow should look like. And it's amazing how often I come across people who get the terminologies wrong and the order wrong in terms of the logical flow of the of strategic planning. And it's really got to start with that V, with that vision, right at the very top of the pyramid. And the vision, sorry, we got a bit of a lag in the slides, but it'll pop up just now. The next step down from vision is goals. So your vision needs to be, what is it that I want to achieve in my own life, personally, and then for my business in the next 3, 5, 10 years, depending on what your time scale is. If you're wanting to sell the business in 2 years' time, obviously your time scale becomes shorter. But ideally, what you're wanting to do is look at a vision as being something in the longer term. And I talk 3 to 5 years normally. Then it's a matter of breaking that down to the next level that becomes your goals. And your goals need to be set on an annual basis. So every 12 months, you need to set new goals that build up to the 5-year plan or the 5-year vision that you've set yourself ultimately. And then the next level down is to break that into basic objectives. And those objectives are a bit more detailed. And the objectives are, what is it that I need to do this year in order to step towards achieving my ultimately my goals, my long-term goals and my vision. And then each objective in turn will need to be broken down into a series of, how am I going to do that, which is the strategies. And don't get too caught up in the terminology. It's more important that the logic actually makes a lot of sense. So the strategies is how each one of those objectives I'm going to make come to fruition. And it's a top line element, a strategy. But then you need to break the strategies down into details. And the detail becomes the tactics. And the tactics becomes the accountability. Who's going to do what part of the strategy, by when, and with what budget, if there's a budget that's associated to it. So critical vision right at the very top. Next level down is your goals, long-term goals. Next level down is your objectives for the next 12 months, building up towards your long-term goals. And then finally, then the next step is your strategies, what we need to do in order, how we need to develop those objectives. And then last but not least, tactics. And the tactics is the breakdown of those strategies into meaningful parts that can then be delegated to individuals to actually make happen. And those tactics are the things that you can then measure your team by. So you can create the KPIs that form part of their job descriptions and so on. I think we've got an incredibly slow lag on the transition of the slides, but I'll just keep moving on and talking if you could just look through that door and see through to the other side. So the KPIs become the measurables of what you need to put in place in order for your staff to know exactly what is required of them in an objective way, so that ultimately everybody's heading towards that long-term set of objectives and ultimately your long-term goals. And then throughout the process, one needs to test and measure what performance has been like, against the objective KPIs that you've set them. And that testing and measuring is a critical part of the process in order to hold people accountable. And that could be yourself as the business owner, or it could be the people that you're delegating to. And then if we move on to the next slide, which is a shows the transition. I think there's an incredibly slow lag, but maybe it's just on my end. So I'm just gonna carry on. What I'm showing here in this slide, if you've got it in front of you, is the overriding total process flow of strategic planning. And don't get too concerned about the detail. I'm going to break it down for you into a lot more detail now. But if we just take the top portion of that plan and move on to the next slide, where it'll just blow it up a little bit more into a bit more detail. Here we have at the very top the starting point, which is your situation analysis. And by situation analysis, what I'm really talking about here is what is the current situation that you're in or your business is in now. And this is assuming you've done your own personal plan well in advance of this. Okay, so now we're talking business plan and business plan only. But the same kind of methodology, the same kind of process flow you can use for your own personal plan as well. So, where are we now as a company? And ultimately, what are the changes and the trends that have occurred in the last little while in the environment? Of course, we're going to enter things like the economic situation, political situation, things that influence the business. Corona may have a significant impact, and more than likely will have a significant impact in your business as well. So those are the kinds of things that you would need to look at as part of your situation analysis. Then it's a matter of setting your vision and your goals for the next 3 to 5 years. So we understand where we are now. We now need to look at where it is that we want to be in top line, sort of broad terms. And then the next step down is key business objectives. So we need to quantify then what we intend to do, firstly, to differentiate our business to anybody else's, and to create sustainable success. And in so doing, we really here talking about what needs to be done. The word "what" is really important in terms of understanding what objectives mean. What is it that we need to do in order to achieve our 5-year goals? And then the next step is breaking that down into customer segmentation. So you may have in your business a nice simple business where you've only got one customer segment that you need to deal with. But if you've got more than one customer segment that you need to deal with, you need to have slightly different plans or considerably different plans for each one of those target markets. And so again, the next level down is a target market objectives for each target market. So the first objective is the business objectives. The next one is specifically what are my objectives in target market X or target market Y. And then beyond that, you may realize that you don't have enough information, that you need to do some more research, which may take the form of qualitative or quantitative research, depending on how you need to do it, in order to really understand what those needs and wants within that market specifically are. And then finally, your marketing strategy formulation. And I'll talk more about marketing strategy shortly. If we move on to the next slide, you'll see that the marketing, continuing with that breakdown, marketing strategy then gets split into various different aspects. And again, don't get too caught up in the detail of this. This can be as involved or as minimalized as it makes sense to your particular business. But just to give you the idea of the kinds of things that would fall into a marketing strategy formulation. And again, the strategy is how we're going to go about meeting the objectives that we've set above. And there would be things like, what is our company value solution proposition? What is it that we're promising people? What is the company brand itself? What is our positioning in the market, and what is our corporate identity? How do we price ourselves strategically in different markets, depending on what it is, the solutions that we're providing? New business development and or sales, strategy needs to fall into directly under the marketing strategy. Your staffing strategy, what kind of people do we need in order to make this business actually come alive and things actually happen? And then communication strategy, your advertising, your PR, your client functions, sales promotion, your media strategy, etc., would all form part of that. And ultimately, what budget you're going to set yourself. And then the next step down would become your key account plans. So if you've got individual sales reps or key account managers or what have you that handle individual markets, each one of them in turn will need to have a plan that is specific to their particular market. So it looks complicated, and I'm going to just show you a slightly sort of more summarized version of that strategic flow. If we can move on to the slide on the strategic planning process flow, which again starts at the beginning with the company vision, but then flows through to, okay, so now we've got to put company marketing plan together. The starting point is, what is our current situation in the market? What is the size of the market, the growth, consumption, trends, buyer behavior? Again, the kind of detail that's really important to go into for your business. Don't go into more detail than is necessary, but don't go into less detail that is actually going to be critical to ultimately how it's going to play out later in the plan. What is your product situation at the moment in terms of your sales, prices, and profits? And I don't typically like to talk about products, but solutions. But that was part of a separate session that we had last week. And then the competitive situation. How has that changed? What's different in terms of the landscape? The economic situation, the political situation, as I mentioned earlier. So all of those things you need to take into consideration first and foremost. Then you need to do a basic SWOT analysis. Where are we now in terms of the opportunities and the threats that are available to us? And start with the opportunities. Always start with that positive aspect of what is it that we could be doing, and where could the business be going forward, before you start to dwell on the threats. But don't dwell on the threats. The whole idea of identifying the threats is, what do we need to do in this plan to neutralize the threats, or to make the threats less of a threat than they could possibly be at the moment. So that's your external analysis, opportunities and threats. Then your internal analysis is your strengths and weaknesses. What are we particularly strong at in this organization? And what are we particularly weak at? Where do we have weaknesses in terms of our current structure, in terms of our current distribution, in terms of our pricing strategy, in terms of our marketing, in terms of our sales? So think about all the elements internally within the business that you need to consider. And then very simply, if you jot down each one of these things in a bullet point form, all you need to do is go through those charts. And this is how I do it with in a strategic planning process, whether I'm doing it for a multi-billion rand turnover business, or a 10 million rand turnover business. The same process is involved. Take those flip charts and just highlight one or two or three of each page that are really, really important. Those become the issues, the key issues that you're going to need to take forward to create a plan from. So sure, there'll be a lot of things on the list, but what are the things that are absolutely critical that you then need to develop into key marketing objectives? And those marketing objectives may be, very simply, if we're talking about price, we need to change the pricing strategy for our business going forward. No detail yet at this point. This is just the objective. Another objective may be, we need to increase the profile of our business through more professional marketing and advertising. So let's just take those as examples. Those in turn, that's what needs to be achieved. The how they need to be achieved becomes the marketing strategies. And each one of those marketing objectives needs to be broken down into 3 or 4 or 5 strategies. And those strategies then provide a little bit more detail as to exactly how we're going to go about achieving the what, the objectives. And then the next step is the activation plans, or the implementation, or the tactics that some people prefer to use. And here it goes down to those measurables. You know, what needs to be done, by whom, by when, and how much. It's breaking the strategies down into bite-sized chunks so that each person, or even if it's just your own business and it's just yourself, that you know exactly what you need to do and prioritize by when, so that you're not running and doing 50,000 things all at the same time and achieving nothing. And then finally, the controls are really critical. So measuring, testing and measuring all the way through. Have I ticked off the things that I said I was going to do by now? And by the time you get halfway through the year, how am I doing in terms of my 12-month objectives that I set myself? Do I need to tweak things, adjust things because certain situations have changed? And that often is the case. So it becomes a working document as much as it's something that to some degree sets you a target and sets something in stone. It's never cast in stone in the sense that it can't be adjusted and changed accordingly. And then if we move on to the next slide, which is really to give you an example, and this one actually is just using one of my clients. It's Musgrave Crafted Spirits. Many of you would have known, will know about Musgrave Gin. This is really what the plan ultimately comes down to. So you'll have a whole series of pages like this, but not too many. There will only be about 5 or 6 key objectives for your business for the next 12 months. And that's the what. So let's just say this is objective number 1, and you've got 5 pages like this accordingly. Then under each objective, you'll have a top line strategy, or you'll have 3 or 4 top line strategies. And for each strategy, you will then have a series of actions or tactics. And those tactics will then be broken down into by whom, by when, and what, if there's a budget allocation that needs to be considered, needs to come into play there. So it all sort of ultimately gets to a point where, very simply, that whole strategic planning process, which really starts at the very top with what is it that I'm wanting to try and change, what is my dissatisfaction, and where am I wanting to take this business into the future, and it funnels it down into very succinctly about, I don't know, it depends on your business, 10 pages, 5 pages, 3 pages of objectives and strategies. And that becomes the working document that you have sitting on your desk every single day, that you involve in the conversation that you have with your staff, that you put their KPIs together on the basis of the actions and tactics that are required. But everybody understands ultimately what that long-term goal is that they're wanting to try and achieve together with you. And they're going on the same journey with you, as opposed to everybody fighting fires and going off in different directions. So to finish up, I would really like to suggest to you that if you do nothing else after today, and this is something that I like to do after every one of these webinar sessions, is just take 5 ideas that you need to take action on today. And that's just short-term planning. What are the 5 things that you need to do in the short term? One of those things may be that you need to start putting together a business vision and a set of goals for the long-term future. And really, I would suggest to you, if you've got a business that doesn't have a vision and long-term goals, quite frankly, you're just shooting in the dark. And you might be lucky, and things may evolve for you, but the chances are stacked up against you if you don't have a plan. There's the old adage: if you don't have a target and you shoot at it, you'll hit it every time. So just remember that. So what are the 5 things that are really important to do today, or that you need to put into place so that you can start taking action on those today, and start developing that longer term strategic plan. And then finally, something I've extended through all the webinar series so far is, if there's a lot more behind strategic planning. This is obviously just a snippet and give you an introduction in terms of the logical flow. But what I'm offering the BDO people on the BDO webinars, if people would like to get in touch with me directly, my details will pop up just now. You're welcome to do so, and to contact me for a complimentary 1-hour coaching session. And it can be on strategic planning, it can be on marketing, sales, staffing, leadership, any of the elements that we've had throughout the webinar series. So with that, I think if we put up the next slide, you've got the contact details. I'm just going to have a look and move across to any questions. Justine, if you want to check those for me. Okay, so I've got first question here from Claire. Many small business owners can only focus on short-term customers, sales pipeline. Trying to get them to think long-term is tricky because they say it is too unpredictable. How do you change short-term thinking to long-term thinking? Claire, it's a really good question, and quite honestly, very often there's a lot of short-term thinking because there is no long-term thinking. And if you just start, as I mentioned in the beginning, with your own personal objectives, what is it that you want to achieve out of life? And very often that'll set the course for your long-term objectives for your own, or your long-term goals for your own business. Because if that's not going to fall into play in terms of your own personal objectives, your own personal dreams in the long term, then it may be something you need to change radically and do very differently. And sure, there are a lot of unpredictable things that come into play, but what one needs to do is rather see those as hurdles as opposed to being absolute barriers. So still set the long-term goals, and sure, there may be things that quite honestly, as long as they're realistic, there may not be things ultimately that you get to in the time that you'd hope to because of circumstances. But you've got to at least set a target, otherwise you're just never going to head in the right direction in the first place. So I would suggest that look at those incidentals or those unpredictable situations rather as being the hurdles that you need to get through in the short term in order to stay on course for the longer term. And the longer term really needs to be, what kind of business do I want to have? What kind of business do I want to leave behind? And what does that mean in terms of my being able to leave it behind? And then the landscape and the situation around that needs to be adapted as part of that plan in order to get there. I can't see any additional questions on my side. So if there are no more questions, then Justine, I'm going to hand over back to you. I think if you could just pop up that last slide, just with the contact details, that'd be great. And thank you very much for your time, and please feel free to give me a shout.
Right. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and just to remind you that today's webinar was the 4th in a series of 5, and we invite you to join us next week again on Tuesday the 23rd. Greg will be joining us and sharing his insights in the gentle art of delegation, something which is very important for those business owners and managers who need to get lots of things done. So please do join us next week. And thank you for joining us, and I wish you the best for the rest of the week ahead. Thank you and goodbye.